Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Stefan and this is the French Cooking Academy. Today we are tackling another French classic sweet, and I think after the crepes, it is the national French dish, this has to be the second one on the list. And these are the Madeleines. Now if I tell you the name Madeleine, you're gonna say, what is this? Is this some kind of girl or something? Now I know it's not gonna ring a bell, but if I show you that thing, and which is the actual tray where you cook the madeleines in, you may start to think, oh yeah, I think I know what it means. But what are exactly madeleines? Let's have a look in more details. Madeleines have two main characteristics. The first one is that hump that you see here. When you turn it over, you should have this clamshell design, these lines that are left by the dish we're going to be used to cook them. When you turn them around, you should have the bottom kind of nice and brown and that hump nice and yellow. When it comes to the consistency, if you break them open, like here, you will see a nice and moist sort of sponge cake-like texture. And this is how a madeleine should be. Right, so now that we know how the madeleine looks like, it is important also to get some history fact. As you can see, I've got my computer here to tell you more about that little history. So the origin of the madeleine comes from the Lorraine region in Commercy. It is actually somehow a bit of a legend because apparently there's no real fact, but here's the story. Basically it was invented by a servant, a maid from the Marquis of Perrotin de Beaumont in 1755, and the story is that the ex-king of Poland that was in that castle of Commercy had an argument with one of the servants and the cook, and the pastry chef or the chef walked out on that day and he ended up with no one to make the dessert, and he was really in a bit of a pickle. And basically that servant proposed a recipe that she knew from her grandma, and she said, you know, I could make that recipe for you if you're stuck, if you don't have anything. He had no one else and he had some guests coming, so he went with the idea of the servant doing the cake, and the cake was actually so good that he really decided to give the name to the cake of Madeleine, which was the actual name of the lady called Madeleine Paulmier. This is for the history. For me, what is most interesting, I think, to know about the Madeleine is how it propagated through all this time in that little region of Lorraine throughout the whole of France, because it is an absolute French icon of a recipe. And if you look at the history, it is actually the Second World War that brought that. The ladies in Commercy started to make a lot of madeleine, and they were at the train station where all the soldiers were passing through, and they were selling this little basket full of madeleine to the soldiers, and they were taking these away, you know, all across France. And the word came about that there was this delicious little treat that was available in that town of Commercy, and today Commercy is the headquarters of Madeleine, with like tons and tons of Madeleine being produced per day. But that's for the history fact. Now let's go for the recipe. Let's start with the ingredients and tools you need for the madeleine. So I will put in the video description, of course, the list of ingredients you need, but as a rough guide, it's made of whole eggs, some honey, baking powder, flour, plain butter, a little bit of lemon and some sugar. In terms of tools, this is the most important: the madeleine pan. You cannot make madeleine without that thing, and it will play a key role. I will explain that later in the video, but you need to get one of those. This is just a little sieve to filter the flour that I'm going to use, but I'll put all the links in the video description. Today I'm going to give you all the necessary secrets you need to know in order to make good looking madeleines. This, for instance, is one of my best whisk I always use. It's got that nice grip on here, and most importantly, it's a soft whisk, and that is already one of the secrets in baking. I always use that whisk. Anyway, let's start. Eggs, you break them a little bit, and immediately you're going to start with your sugar. Now we're going to incorporate the sugar with the eggs, and actually you need to beat them for 3 to 4 minutes to get a nice and foamy mix. So you start like that. After a minute, you're going to immediately incorporate your honey. Now the honey is one of the, I would say, the second secret when it comes to madeleine, because it really adds you know, a specific texture to the Madeleine. It gives that kind of bounciness and it's not as crunchy. So important to mix honey and sugar together. And you keep on beating this for 3 to 4 minutes until it gets nice and foamy. And that's it. Look at this. Nice and white, nice and foamy. We're now ready to incorporate the flour. Now just before you incorporate the flour, make sure you melt all of the butter in a pan, and when it's melted you add a squeeze of lemon juice and a pinch of salt, and we're going to let it cool down a little bit while we're adding the flour in. For the flour, very important as well, as you may know that, always sifter it or filter it like that. So you take your flour and you make a nice snow so there's no little bits in there. It's going to be all very, very even. Next goes in the baking powder. Once everything is in, you're going to start incorporate everything slowly. We can now incorporate the butter. The butter goes all in. You can put it in 2 times if you want, but I just put everything in. It doesn't really matter too much. And you're going to slowly incorporate it with your mixer. So you keep on whisking like this very slowly until you get a nice kind of paste like that, nice and uniform. All done. Look at that. We've got what we call in France the ruban, this perfect consistency. So now the third secret for this Madeleine, you're gonna have to leave this batter to rest for a minimum of 2 hours at room temperature. So you put a cloth on top and you're gonna leave it in your kitchen on the side of the stove for at least 2 hours before we can cook them. After 2 hours, this is how the batter looks like. And look at this. You see how the baking powder has created that kind of little emulsion in there. So this is now ready to be laid down in the mold, and I'm going to show you how to prepare the mold and give you the last tips on how to cook the Madeleine. And now the most important tips or little secret of all is this. The Madeleine pan. Okay, how deep these dents here are is really what is gonna make that little bump at the top. This is one of the factors. So I'm using a non-stick pan here, but yet I'm still gonna coat the bottom of each with a little bit of melted butter. Now before we start filling this little mold, you're going to preheat your oven at 220 degrees Celsius, which is about 428 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll explain why in a bit. Now to fill the gap here, you can do it with a piping bag, but you can also just use a spoon, and you fill 3/4 of the space. So you leave a little space in there for the Madeleine to grow. When the batter is in the mold, as you can see here, you got some little space available, which is good. We need to cook the Madeleine. The Madeleine is very good because they're easy to make and they're very quick to cook, 10 minutes on the clock. But the trick to cooking the Madeleine and having the hump is to start them off at a very high temperature for the first 3 minutes. 220 degrees Celsius for the first 3 minutes will give that thermal shock that will create that kind of protuberance at the top of the Madeleine. This is the typical thing that you want to get. So first 3 minutes very, very high heat, and then you reduce the heat down to 200 degrees Celsius, about 396 Fahrenheit for the rest of the time, which is 6 to 7 minutes. Now let's cook these beauties and I'll show you the results afterwards. The Madeleines are just out of the oven and I took them out. As you can see, they go out of the mold very easily. I've did a little presentation here, and this is like the 4 o'clock goûter for kids, and that we give a little basket of Madeleine, and that's the typical way. Maybe these ladies were selling this to the soldiers, this basket of Madeleine, that's what it would have looked like. But for the rest, I mean, look at these lovely little cakes. You turn them around, you got that clamshell line here and the typical hump here that you see on the side. That is what you called a boudotte in French, and it is typical for the Madeleine. That is a classic looking Madeleine. But anyway guys, I hope now you have all the necessary tips and secrets in order to make the real Madeleine, and this is really how they should look like. So please, if you make the recipe, let me know how you go in the comments. If it doesn't work, let me know what happened so I can help. And as always, if you really like the video, putting a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you can, consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page. That will really help. Remember, I'm just a small creator, and posting all these videos is a costly affair and a difficult business, so support is always welcome. As for me, I'm off for today, and I see you all in my next video. Take care all.